Welcome to Nerd Index. Today we've compiled every anime that we covered for fall 2024. First, you can watch the reviews separated by chapters in the description, and then at the end we'll give you our final overview tier list of the whole season. 365 days to the wedding. I usually love the fake dating trope, but I think that this setup isn't as satisfying as they normally are in romance novels because the show's two main characters are both introverts and they don't feel like an unlikely pairing. Like, if they would just have talked to each other normally, I think that they could have easily ended up dating anyway without this situation. An interesting aspect is that the show uses the romances of the side characters to help our main characters interpret what love and marriage truly mean since they have no personal experience. And the main conflict is them doubting themselves instead of the usual having to perform the relationship for the benefit of others. Though that does happen a little in the first few episodes, they actually spend most of the time telling their families the truth that they're not actually getting married, and the ominous anonymous calls they received ended up having very little impact. Anecdotally, their steps when they're walking are always so loud, but Honjoji's shoes in particular are very noticeable.
It's okay that her shoes are loud because he mentions liking it.
I don't like it.
Too bad. It's for him, not for you.
It's literally like every scene where they're outdoors, it's like clop, clop, clop. And Ohara's relationship with his cat was super cute and funny, and the opening theme song was peppy and enjoyable.
Yeah, I do wish the characters, our two mains, got to spend a little bit more time together, because that's when the show felt the best.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Like, the pacing of it going from the fake dating to the let's actually date felt weird because there was so much time that they did not spend together and that they didn't really, like, nurture a relationship and just, like, barely started to get to know each other. So it felt like they went from literally fighting about whether or not they'd gotten in an argument and then they went to just straight kissing out of nowhere. And then it was also like, oh, living together is so freaking hard, I don't like this, to, you know what, let's actually just do it and get married for real within like 20 minutes of each other. And I'm like, huh? So with all that in mind, this was a 6 out of 10 for me. So we just finished watching 2.5 Dimensional Seduction. I really liked the first few episodes where it was like everything up until the end of the first event that they went to. It was like they were doing such a good job keeping the pace quick and making it so that you felt that excitement and passion and energy while you were watching. And Ririsa is really cute, and so she like carries the desire to make everything work really well. And I thought that she and Okamura are really cute together. But I started to fall off or get frustrated with the cosplay events that they went to after the first one. Basically, it was like they were always just an excuse to have an existential crisis for like 4 episodes, or it was like they were making more rookie mistakes that you feel like at that point they should have talked about or thought about before going to that event again. And Noah and Arya are not my favorite characters, so then they, having them take over for the second half of the show wasn't very rewarding for me personally. I think it's still really fun to watch them put together their outfits and seeing like how many different versions of Liliel they could put together was kind of funny.
Yeah, they did a good job being fast-paced at the beginning. I also really liked the ending arc with the mangaka. Yeah. Was very fun and emotional.
That was like, even though again it was like, oh, we're using an event or a convention to bring down the emotional atmosphere and kind of go into one of those sadder, lonelier places, they actually did it well in that arc. And like the whole interaction for Arya's dad and his original manga, and then obviously their love for the current manga and everything was really cool. It was a nice tie-in. Who is best girl?
Probably main girl.
Ririsa?
Yeah.
I must argue with you, and I think Mikari is the best girl.
The idol girl?
Model.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like she was just tsundere enough. Like, she wasn't going hard on it all the time. And I don't know. Like, there's a place for being the happy rainbows person all the time, but I lean more towards people that are a little bit more real. And so her being all, like, angsty was funny. Oh, we also have confirmation already for season 2. We just don't know when. I wonder if it'll be another 24 episodes or if it's going to be... Like, I don't know how much source material they have to work off of right now. It's only been going since 2019. So anyway, for season 2, it'll be interesting to see how they keep things fresh, what kind of, I guess, other events we might do. How many more iterations of Liliel could they possibly bring us? And maybe, like, are we going to start seeing more of the kind of tropey story beats like cultural festivals or sports festivals or something? I don't know. I think you could tie in cosplay for a cultural festival, but I don't think you could for a sports festival.
My bet's in they start dating.
Yeah, I struggle to believe that there's more that we can do that we don't already know about without her deciding to finally cosplay another character. So we'll see. As a reincarnated aristocrat, I'll use my appraisal skill to rise in the world season 2. Individual character development took a backseat this season in favor of developing the storyline of the war and the progression of Ars's life. We saw a marriage, successful battles, and acquiring new land. It was interesting seeing how their war discussions transitioned into the battle sequences. The appraisal skill also received a slight upgrade in the information that it provides us. Instead of discovering people with talent or having to find people, it felt like this season's special people were just throwing themselves at Ars. And you knew that they were special before he even appraised them, so it kind of just took the uniqueness out of it. Like, of course, the most skilled general in the fortress is going to have high stats, or of course, the leader of the mercenaries is going to have really high stats.
The appraisals this season felt like they were more to compare to people that we had already seen, and it feels like he was mostly using the appraisals with the upgrade to figure out how to convince people to be onto his side. And so his negotiations were more important this season.
So it wasn't so much like the first season where we were finding people that had been overlooked by society and helping nurture them, but really just more positioning people where they should be. This also ties in with how it felt like Ars was more passive this season in general, not really sharing as many personal ideas or making as many statements, and mostly letting his group of retainers do the work for him, which theoretically is the point of having them, but he gets a little lost in the crowd. All of the characters are still really likable and enjoyable to spend time with, though. In the end, I think the show still maintains interest. It also had a solid ending that should satisfy viewers while leaving room for more, and I would like to see a third season. This was a 7.5 out of 10. Bleach, The Thousand Year Blood War, Part 3. I was so hyped during Part 1, and I was still there for Part 2, but the pacing of Part 3 was really slow. The amount of important things that happened could have been condensed into like 4 episodes. The escalation of the story just was not as intense as previous seasons. And I think the other part of the problem is that we spend a lot of time with characters that I don't care too much about, so it wasn't as exciting for me personally. I'm just glad that they've announced that Part 4 is the finale, so we know that they're not going to keep dragging it out forever and we'll finally get the conclusion. So with a heavy amount of personal bias, I'm giving this a 7 out of 10. Blue Lock Season 2. I remember when Season 2 first started airing that a lot of people were complaining about the animation quality and saying that it wasn't to the same standard as Season 1. But going into it, I didn't notice anything egregious, and it didn't matter as much because the purpose of those episodes was really just to get to know the new characters now that we are down to a smaller group of overall players. Or maybe I'm just living in blissful ignorance because I didn't rewatch Season 1, so I don't have an exact side-by-side comparison for possible changes in style.
Yeah, I also felt that the slower style of animation was allowing for the focus to be on introducing characters. While it would have been nice to have every game animated like the final 2 episodes, it probably would have made the first half of the season have to have a budget of a whole season and end up slowing it down too much.
Yeah, these choices allowed the final fight of the last 2 episodes to truly shine and added impact to that moment. And during each match, there was still lots of analysis for every play and tactic, and waiting to see who would be able to score goals or make interesting plays was still a tense experience. The additional time segments at the end of the episodes were good comedic relief as well. Also, I was expecting more complaining about what positions people were given for the official 11-man team, but they actually were cooperative, which was nice. So while the first half of the season was establishing who would be on the Blue Lock team, the second half of the season was their exhibition match against the Japan Under-20 team. And the show utilized this match to focus on the rivalry between the Itoshi brothers. We got a little bit more backstory, as well as seeing them go head-to-head on the field. But I feel like I still don't really understand why Rin's brother would forsake him when he came back from his 4 years of training. The best thing I could discern was that he wanted to see Rin play soccer for himself, and that wasn't going to happen if he kept chasing after him.
To me, it felt like his brother had gone out into the world and seen the outside soccer and felt like that he couldn't match up to that as a striker.
I'm not going to say exactly who did what because it's probably too spoilery, but our boys completed Phase 1 of the Blue Lock program and will seemingly be moving on to playing for the Under-20 World Cup.
I almost wish we had more of a Fate-like split perspective where we got to have multiple main characters, because the show does suffer a little bit from having the main character get his way and knowing that he's going to make it.
Yeah, they've definitely centered it around Isagi, and so it's like, you know that there wouldn't be a story, or like we wouldn't necessarily be continuing on if he didn't win or if he didn't get placed on the team. So who's your favorite player?
My favorite player is probably Bachira.
Oh my god, don't steal my man.
Oh, well, too bad.
Well, I was going to say mine is either Bachira or Chigiri. Technically, they're a toss-up to me because they both like offer totally different things as characters, so.
Yeah. My favorite character, though, is probably Ego.
Mm-hmm.
Just because he's such a wild card throughout like the entire show.
He's so off the rails all the time.
And it's great.
And they draw his neck so long. It's so funny.
Do you have a favorite character other than the players or no?
There's not really anyone else except him and the poor assistant that he's constantly being mean to. It was cool getting to see their families, though, at the game. That was really cute. I like that nice touch.
Yeah, that was kind of fun family bonding.
I'm sure we would be meeting a ton of new players by going onto the world stage and seeing a lot of new playstyles, so I feel like a season 3 would be really exciting. It's just going to be a matter of when. But overall, I feel like the season was an 8 out of 10. Demon Lord 2099. If you're coming for cyberpunk vibes, this show doesn't take itself that seriously and isn't that dark, but there is plenty of neon and futuristic tech. Veltol has a magnetic personality that not only draws in his followers, but also draws you in as the viewer, and there was a good amount of humor that carried the first few episodes of the show. They went hard on the opening battle scene, but honestly all of the battles were fun and unique from each other.
Yeah, all the heroes' battles were really cool.
The heroes, specifically. That's it. That's all you care about.
They were all cool, but those were especially fun.
And Machina's battle form was also super cool. I kind of just love her in general.
She was very cute.
I also wish we'd gotten more Machina Veltol moments because they were very cute together, and they are a canon relationship, which makes me happy. But once Takahashi shows up, they don't get much one-on-one time anymore. The first part of the show works on combining the past and the future and acclimating Veltol to his new reality.
Him trying to explain his work experience at the commercial guild was very funny.
And his first step on the path to renewed world domination is to defeat Marcus, who has filled the power vacuum while he's been gone. I thought Marcus was a good villain, if not a little cliche at times, and I think he honestly would have benefited a lot more from bettering himself over the 500 years instead of just making a cheat code with the Familia. After we defeat the first big bad of the show, we move on to the next villain, High School.
So scary.
But for real, the second half of the show had a tonal shift, and while it wasn't any worse than the first half, it was very different. Luckily, we weren't in the classroom for very long, and it did serve a magical and story progression purpose. The season concludes by giving us a clear goal of finding more immortals without any horrible cliffhangers. Going into this show, I didn't have much faith, but I was pleasantly surprised by how much I ended up liking it. This was an 8 out of 10. Fairy Tail 100 Years Quest. If you've ever seen Fairy Tail, this is more of the same. And more of the same to the point that they're just reusing plot points and elements from the original and not really expanding on anything or bringing anything new to the table. Like, we didn't even really have any power scaling or magic evolution this time around. But for me, this is one of those guilty pleasure shows that I'm starting to grow out of, but I still want to know what happens. And I know it's not the purpose of this kind of show, but I am glad that they decided to expand on the canon romances. I've always been a Groovia shipper, so I'm excited to see the progress for them in particular, and it's super cute. I did enjoy the Water Dragon and Moon Dragon arcs, but the Wood Dragon arc felt like it dragged on and was just way too split between areas, so I wish that had been done differently. And per the classic meme of a person when they're on the enemy team versus when they're in the friend group, the white mage goes from being the pinnacle of all evil to, oh, I'm sorry, woe is me, just help me save my planet. But this felt like a blazing pace in comparison to the original Fairy Tail seasons because we got through 2.5 dragons in 25 episodes, which was surprising to me. I've seen a lot of people say that we will probably have to wait a while for season 2 because the source material would need time to get further ahead. But this season left us at a good stopping point between story arcs, so 7 out of 10. Goodbye Dragon Life. To me, the first 5 episodes were good, setting aside the random breast milk fetish, because learning what Dolan was capable of and meeting Selena and Christina was fun, and the arc of them fighting their first bad guy was also interesting. But as soon as the demons showed up, it dragged everything down because the dialogue became almost unbearable and the fighting sequences were not very good. The demon Geolude in particular embodies the whole problem with that entire second half of the series because his movements in the fight sequences felt really stiff and his dialogue was literally just start a line with a sinister laugh and then say something vague like, you'll regret challenging me. And it's like, the show still had enjoyable moments, which is why we didn't drop it, but ultimately it suffered from the quality of the writing and a poor utilization of the characters' abilities.
Yeah, there was kind of an interesting setup and his powers were cool, but he didn't really get to use them much, and the little fighting that we did get wasn't very good, and the demon arc was dragged out through half of the show for basically one fight, which was kind of rough.
So overall, 6 out of 10 in my opinion. How I attended an all-guys mixer. We loved the humor of this show. Everything was so funny, and the voice acting was really good. I don't usually point out the voice acting quality because it's rare for it to not be good, but this felt noticeably a cut above. It really brought out so much more of the characters' personalities and lovability. And then episode 4 at the zoo, they did my favorite anime cliche of the censored cockroaches, which gets me every time.
There was also an amazing line about watching them run around in their little cages.
The safety of looking at them from behind the glass. The chemistry between the characters, not only as couples, but in their group dynamic, was really good, and the girls led most of the interactions.
But were they really girls?
My favorite couple was Fuji and Asagi, because they have such a genuine connection, and Asagi says that Fuji is Fuji no matter what she does and is so accepting. He's also a total cinnamon roll, and all of their scenes together have a great energy.
The best part of their relationship is the crazy things they got into because Asagi is so willing to just say yes to anything that happens.
Then Suo and Tokiwa are second best. They have good chemistry together, but their relationship is a little weighed down by the fact that other people are just constantly gawking at Suo all the time. And my least favorite couple was Kohaku and Hagi, because Hagi is blocking himself by overthinking everything and not trying to be in the moment and truly connect with her, while Kohaku is incredibly dense. Hagi also can't seem to get over how her cross-dressing makes him perceive Kohaku as two different people. The second half of the show focused more on my least favorite couple of Kohaku and Hagi, so it brought the humor and intrigue down for me, but overall it was still a great show. But if the characters' personalities and the show humor does not tickle you, then your experience will be very different from ours, so it's a bit up to personal taste. For us, it was an 8 out of 10. I'll become a villainess who goes down in history. I've been getting really burnt out on the villainess genre of anime, but I still give them a try each season because every now and then there will be a diamond in the rough. I think I'll become a villainess who'll go down in history differentiated itself enough to make it worth watching, though I will admit that there are still better villainess genre shows.
Mostly because this one was basically a villainous show in name only because she was always trying to do good in a slightly evil way.
I thought that their magic system was interesting and that nearly all of the characters were likable, so those factors carried it through the genre tropes. Alicia's version of being a villainess can either be thought of from the perspective of how Liz sees her due to their interactions with Alicia being her watcher, or you can think about how Alicia's actions are usually against the societal norm, and so therefore she's not acting in an evil way, but she thinks that she's being a villainess because of it. But it was a little bit weird that even though she was reincarnated into the world of the game, that she didn't seem to have too much game knowledge to leverage for her own advantage.
Yeah, it seemed like from her comments that after the first few episodes, the contents of the game and her story diverged quite a bit from the major plot points that she had known.
Alicia has very strong mental resolve that gets her through any situation, and she also is a very hard worker, which made her into the powerful woman that she is with her combat skills and her unusually high magic ability. Basically, anything she put effort into really pays off for her in the end. Did you like her long hairstyle or her short haircut better?
I tend to lean more towards long hair, but her short hair wasn't terrible.
I feel like it made her look as young as she actually is in the show versus her long hair kind of suited her better, or like her attitude better. The romance between Alicia and Duke is very much a subplot. She doesn't overtly engage with or accept his feelings and literally says she doesn't have time for romance with all her goals in mind. But there are some cute moments between them from his attempts to flirt with her. I'm not a big fan of where the story is going with her being exiled to Laval to try to learn what the country's doing, because it's like we established this huge cast of characters and people who are truly meaningful to her, but we're now abandoning all of that, and it's like, I know she's the main character, and so that's why they're doing this, but realistically, I feel like there must have been somebody else more qualified to do this mission.
I also wish the show had just ended a few episodes sooner so that this season was more of a standalone story.
With that in mind, it was still an entertaining show, and so we gave it a 7 out of 10. MF Ghost, Season 2. So, spoiler warning on this one, because if you haven't finished watching it and you plan to, you should come back to this video when you're done. It was interesting to see the driver's skills in the rain, and not that I was hoping for an accident, but I'm glad that they acknowledged the danger of the conditions by having a few accidents this season. Nobody was hurt, but it really shook up the race standings, and so it was well handled. I'm glad that they consistently explain how the 86 is managing to not only keep up but succeed against the other cars, so that it's not just about Kanata being a super genius. It feels like a lot of effort was done to make sure that the races would be balanced, and I appreciate that attention to detail. The fight for third was so tense, but this show isn't the kind of sports anime where you're going to win just because you're the main character, so Kanata sadly finishes fourth. After the first race of this season, we get a big turbocharge upgrade for the 86, which has now taken it outside the realm of what my FRS was capable of. It's been so fun watching the show from a standpoint of what my little underdog car could have accomplished in the right hands, but I understand the story's need to power scale. With this upgrade, Kanata has taken the training wheels off and is truly unleashed, and I'm excited to see what that potential will bring us. Or that's what I thought until he injured his elbow and is again handicapped in the latest race. The tension from watching him try to race through the pain is really intense, and once again, we're left hanging in the middle of a race between seasons. Now that season 3 has been confirmed, I feel like we can assume the seasons will be a year apart again like last time, so hopefully season 3 will release in fall 2025.
I like how much detail they go into for each race, but I kind of wish they were a little bit faster to get through a race.
Yeah, I know that you kind of have to balance showing everybody, but then maybe you shouldn't have made it so that there were 15 cars each time.
And the music always hits. Not quite as, but there's still good songs every race.
The soundtrack is a bop. I know I'm probably coming from a place of bias because I really love cars, but this show is still performing well in my opinion, and I really appreciate how they balance the races and their personal lives and making us still care about everything that's going on. And so I would say that season 2 still gets a 9 from me. Nina the Starry Bride. I hate to be that person, but I enjoyed the manga more than the anime, though it's a little difficult to put my finger on exactly why. But sometimes the anime would just feel like the pacing was strange or like things were a little forced.
I feel like the show reminded me a lot of Sacrificial Princess and the King of Beasts in kind of the theme of main character getting swept away into a foreign land, basically.
Yeah, like going from poverty to being part of like the royal, not family, but basically. Nina is the kind of innocent, upbeat heroine whose desire to help people dictates her every action, and her frequent outfit changes and hairstyle changes are a fun part of the show and can help distract you from the fact that all of the backgrounds and environments are rendered in a very bland or basic way. This is another love triangle romance. Ultimately, I'm on Team Azure because it feels like we know he cares about her for her and not with strings attached. And his emotional baggage is also fairly uncomplicated in comparison to Set, which makes him seem like a better choice. Set's fairly irredeemable to me, and so he's never mentally been in the love triangle from my perspective. Like, I understand that he had an incredibly abusive childhood and doesn't really understand how to live a normal life, but it goes beyond being an anti-hero and he just ends up being cruel and dangerous. But it's easy to forget his actions in the past and get swept up into his growing love for Nina, and we have spent so much more time with him in comparison to the time we spent with Azure that it feels as if we're getting Stockholm Syndrome right along with her.
I think I liked Set a little bit better, but that's probably just because we actually get to know him and spend time with him a little bit more and get to see him actually start to care for her.
Like, he has actual character development versus Azure kind of feels like he's the same person the whole story. I definitely felt like I finally got swept up into the actual story itself the most once we got to the capital city, but just as that action is ramping up and we're learning so many intriguing details about the story, the season left us completely in the middle of a major story arc, and the final episode literally felt as if they expected to be able to air another episode a week later, but it doesn't even feel like a season completion or anything. At the time of recording, we don't even have confirmation for a season 2, so it's just like we're all left here to go buy the manga, I guess. So overall, I'm going to say the manga is better. The anime is a 7 out of 10. Ron Kamonohashi's Forbidden Deductions Season 2. The first case and the final case of the season were the ones that actually provided story progression regarding the Moriarty family and Ron's own past.
The first case being a weaving together of 3 cases to make a 4th case was really interesting, especially with how they connected them all back to the main mystery of the story, Rahan.
Well, and it was like the Moriarty family was just kind of testing him and trying to see what they could get away with again and all that kind of stuff. So it was setting a lot of groundwork for the end of the season. My biggest complaint about the show is that the mysteries are still fairly telegraphed, and so it doesn't feel like it's very hard to solve most of the cases, which was also a problem during season 1.
Unlike other mystery shows, I feel like the show actually shows you all the parts that would let you figure out what the mystery is before the characters announce how it happened, which I find to be a little bit more fun than having the characters reveal something that the viewer didn't get to see in the show at all.
Yeah, we do get a little bit more, like, shots of the environmental and things laid out for us that might be why I feel like it's more telegraphed.
They're a little bit more pointed at showing the evidence than most shows.
I feel like the fact that they always cover Ron's eyes with his hair stops me from connecting with him as a character, and the payoff of him flicking his hair to the side to signal when he's solved a case is just not enough to outweigh the fact that we are missing his windows to the soul.
It's such a good payoff. I actually also kind of appreciate this as a viewer, as it feels like we're more directed at seeing from Toto's perspective and how he sort of views Ron as a mystery himself.
Well, yeah, because it's supposed to be a Holmes-Watson partnership scenario, but I don't feel like that was necessarily the way to go about it, because it really like I said, disconnects me from Ron and caring about him. Now that Ron managed to make contact with the House of M, I could only hope that a season 3 would bring us a face-off between Milo and him directly. This season itself was a 7 out of 10. Spirit Chronicles Season 2. Haruto is not helping with the every main character is just Kirito allegations, considering that he not only shares the same voice actor, but also looks very similar in character design. Because Season 1 came out in 2021, I had to rewatch it again before starting Season 2. The first episode of Season 2 picks up right where we left off from the ending of Season 1, which I appreciated. But it was driving me insane how they were layering the audio of the two languages over top of each other constantly. And it wasn't just for a few minutes, it was literally 4 straight episodes.
It was an interesting way of proving that they were speaking 2 different languages and having it translated in real time, but it did get played out for a little bit too long.
And I know it's silly, but it bothered me that they drew the earring in Season 2 not on his earlobe, but basically inside of his ear.
It did feel like it was being more of an earbud than an earring.
Plus, they were doing a weird episode preview at the end of the intro theme song instead of the end of the episode giving a preview for the next one. And so at first we were like, wait, what is this? What's going on? It was very jarring. Ultimately, this season had a lot less action and it felt more lifeless than Season 1. The fighting also lacked a certain level of urgency.
Like there was a few times where we would stop in the middle of a battle and just chat for a few minutes.
Like we literally knew that they had infiltrated the building where people were trying to stay safe. And it's like, oh, never mind. We can still talk to you and just stand here and not go rescue them. So it was a bit of a disappointment after waiting for so many years. This was a 6 out of 10. The do-over Damsel conquers the Dragon Emperor. Before we go into the show as a whole, I want to address the elephant in the room. And I want to clarify that I do not approve of adults having relationships with minors, and I do not approve of grooming. And I would not say that that's necessarily what's happening in this show, but obviously it's a slippery slope and there's been a lot of discourse online. But here are the facts as presented by the story about why we are in a nearly 10-year age gap situation. First, the story is set in a world that is seemingly based in olden times before any technology, and her parents don't even bat an eye about an arranged marriage between her and the older prince of their kingdom. Second, Jill has experienced a time loop, so her 17-year-old self has now been placed back into her younger body. So by that technicality, they're only mentally 2 years apart in age.
But he feels way younger than her mentally.
Yeah, their maturity is a disparity. And the reason why Hadis needs her to be a young girl is because anyone over the age of 14 can be possessed by the evil goddess and used against him. So the show also does not have any mature themes, so it's not like it's racy or they're doing anything inappropriate.
The most romantic thing that he does is baking her food all the time, and it's adorable.
So while all this might sound like excuses, I feel like if you go into this with a mindset that says that you understand that a relationship like this isn't normal and you don't let it delude you, then it should be fine. The overall atmosphere of the show is funny and cute with a decent amount of political drama. And when I say it's funny, I mean that I was caught off guard so many times by so many gags and that we were laughing out loud through the majority of the show, and some things that happened were just completely inexplicable.
And it's funny, during some moments they'll make the background people just little blob people frantically running around, and it's fun to see how they make the focus the main characters.
Jill is a total badass with her amazing magic, combat skills, and tactical mind. I think it's cute that they made her the food character by way of Hadis making her treats and stuff for her all the time instead of her just randomly having a massive appetite like the trope usually goes. And basically, all of the characters on Team Jill are very likable. At first, it didn't make sense that Gerald wouldn't give up on her and just pick a different fiance, but as the story unfolds, we learn that she somehow has a tie to the goddess Kratos, and that said goddess is controlling the royal family. And I thought it was cool that basically everything boiled down to a centuries-old dispute between two gods. I thought the fighting was pretty well done, and the CGI that they used for the dragons was not nearly as bad as the majority of things that I've seen for CGI dragons in other shows. I would say it was slightly above average. It was also kind of neat that the dragons had an entire magic classification system and that Jill got to show everybody up by getting the help of a black dragon, which would be the second highest in ranking. The final episode concluded a story arc, and they left us bits of information that we could make into a season 2, but nothing that left you hanging or feeling like you were unsatisfied at the end. I really hope that we do get a season 2, and I can't wait to see what happens next, because honestly, this was probably my favorite show of the season. This is a 9 out of 10. The healer who was banished from his party is in fact the strongest. This is the kind of fantasy show that really takes the time to explain everything from scratch, like how guilds work, how to form parties, how to balance combat, what monsters do, etc. So if you're the kind of viewer that is tired of those things being rehashed in great detail, then this show isn't for you. The overall vibe of the show was fairly laid back, even when they were in battle. The monster mutations were an interesting aspect of the magic system, though. And we were joking that Laos' empowered form reminds us of Soraka with the horn and his healing powers and everything.
But like season 3 pre-rework Soraka, where outside of spamming heals, she also killed everything around her with her starfall.
But the one thing that the show didn't explain that I actually wanted to know was the classification system of fighters. Like, why is he considered a healer when he's not as good at being a healer as he is at doing so many other things that we saw?
The show had some interesting questions that were actually answered in the season, which was nice. Like, where was the guildmaster the whole time? And why would they put pillars around the city rather than walls? Which I appreciated.
Yeah, they did actually address quite a few things. But it was a very take it or leave it show for me, so this was a 6 out of 10. The most notorious talker runs the world's greatest clan. The show definitely lived up to its perception of being edgy from what we saw in the trailers, so you can expect some gore, and also it has you leading with the expectation that people are going to do or act in the worst ways possible. Like, you meet a new character and you're basically asking yourself, okay, what horrible thing did you do? And then the story sets it up so that the talker class of magic is supposed to be the weakest class, but everything they tell you about how his magic works is just overpowered, and Noel has done everything possible to make sure that he's not perceived as weak, so the entire time you're kind of just feeling like being a talker isn't actually a weakness.
And the other classes that we do kind of get to see a little bit of, we don't really see any abilities that seem to be much stronger than the talker class.
There wasn't anything that like directly countered it or anything either if you were like PvPing, which isn't really the point. You're supposed to fight the monsters in the abyss, but still, there was no counterbalance. It's just supposed to be, oh, you can't buff yourself, so you must be worthless in combat.
You don't need to worry about buffing yourself when you can just paralyze everyone else in the combat, though. So
yeah.
I don't really see how he's the weakest.
No. So that whole argument around it wasn't very interesting. They could have just said that we have a different kind of magic. They didn't have to make it out to be as if it was lesser magic, you know? And then Alma ended up being my favorite character, which I would not have expected from my original impressions from the trailer. And I thought that her backstory was interesting and sad as an explanation for some of her psychoses. And just like in general, I thought she was cute. Who was your favorite character?
Yeah, probably the same.
I also kind of wish that the Gambino arc hadn't lasted so long, because that dude was just so hard to look at and listen to. And like, I know that's the point, right? You're not supposed to like him, but it bothered me. The show definitely accomplished a lot in one season, and they left a roadmap for what they could accomplish in another season, so I hope that it does get a continuation, because it was interesting and it had good energy and the pacing was good. Whisper Me a Love Song. I do remember a lot of people ragging on the animation quality when the show was first airing, and honestly, it wasn't as bad as everybody said, but it wasn't that great either. I'd say it was fairly standard low-budget animation, but obviously not every show can be a high-budget, high-effort production. I liked the first half about Yori and Himari getting together because it was a cutesy romance vibe and they made a good couple, and Himari was adorable.
They were both very cute in their own ways, which made it nice and very fun to watch them to get together.
But the second half of the show focused entirely on Shiho and Aki's storyline, which was overly dramatic and a little depressing.
I actually really liked how everyone's stories tied together in the second half, although I will admit that it was a major tonal shift that could be off-putting, but getting the story of the other band, Lorelei's members, was an interesting change in perspective that I felt like we could have resolved a little bit faster, but I don't know if it would have held the same weight to it.
I thought the music from their bands was good for what little we heard of it. We weren't really given the full songs when they were performed, but it was still pretty to listen to.
The songs are all good, and I will probably try and listen to them again, especially if there's full versions available.
But I think there were some missed opportunities because it was like after Yori and Himari got together, they basically stopped going on dates on screen or hanging out much because of how time-consuming band practice is.
I do wish we got to see them together more, but using their relationship to build the story of Shiho and Aki's relationship was a good way of introducing them and seeing them talk about how they can help their friends, which was better than what most romance shows do for having drama in the second half, which is having couples break up and get into no contact misunderstandings.
And Yori is such a huge cat person, and Himari has a cat that she could have used as an excuse to invite her over to meet him, and so I'll just have to imagine the cuteness of that kind of a scene for myself and what could have been.
Yeah, I too am a little sad that scene never got to happen.
Then the show kind of shoehorned their first kiss into the last 30 seconds as if they realized, oh wait, they haven't done anything except hand-holding yet.
I thought it was a good, solid ending to the show to wrap up the storyline.
I think this was a fairly average high school romance show that could have used a little bit more personality to distinguish itself. So this was a 6 out of 10 for me because I was generally bored and considered dropping it like 2 times.
I don't know. Maybe I'm just a sucker for some cute Yuri band romance, and I didn't lose interest in the second half, but I would give it probably closer to an 8 out of 10.
Yakuza Fiance. The show has some mature themes because they get fairly gritty regarding the Yakuza instead of glossing over or romanticizing it. There's a decent amount of fighting, and while the animation for it isn't ultra flashy, I think it is still well done. The art style as a whole is actually really cool. It's kind of interesting that they made Yoshino into basically a political hostage, but she doesn't let the situation get to her and instead decides that she's going to show Kirishima who's boss.
Yeah, it was fun to see how she tries to get above him, like selling her kidney.
Or did she sell her kidney? That actually makes me another point where I actually really liked her cousin. She was so snarky and funny.
The same person.
No, the cousin and the... What was she going to be, a news anchor? Model? Whatever.
Something like that.
Secondary woman that looks exactly the same. We'll have to find the meme where it was like, corporate wants you to see the difference between this picture and this picture, because I literally had to point out to you that they were 2 different characters.
Yep.
Kirishima is the embodiment of a red flag, and his behavior will always keep you guessing what's going to happen next. But Yoshino's no pushover and can definitely hold her own with him, both in mind games and in tussles. In a story full of big personalities, she doesn't get lost. I think their love triangle with Shoma is interesting because Yoshino doesn't seem to be in love with either of them instead of the usual dynamic of a girl not being able to decide because her heart is torn between 2 people. And as the viewer, you could easily imagine her fitting well with either one of them in a real relationship, though I'm partial to Shoma. I'm a sucker for the childhood friend winning. And I don't even know how to explain that scandalous hand-holding scene other than to say that I was very thrown off and it was an interesting way to end the season. I saw a couple people say that Kirishima let his intrusive thoughts win in that moment. But it makes me feel like Yoshino is in for a rough time now that they're actually dating, and she might not maintain as much of her balance in their power dynamic moving forward. So, who is best guy?
Neither of them. I didn't like either of them that much.
Obviously, for most people, this isn't people that you would pick from anyway, so Shoma has less problems. Okay, so then, which tattoo did you like better?
I think I like Shoma's better, mostly just because of his arms.
Yeah, the way that they did the waves and the flowers is really pretty. So overall, I felt like it held up really well against my experience of reading the manga, and I hope we get a season 2 here, just like everything else. I'm always hoping for a season 2, and this was an 8 out of 10 for me. So first we have the shows that we dropped, which we already put in, and they were dropped for various reasons, which you'll see on the screen here. So the first show to talk about would be I'll Be a Villainess Who Will Go Down in History. And I think this was average.
Yeah, it seems fair. Might be slightly high average, but not great.
Yeah. And then we have How I Attended an All-Guys Mixer, which was a runner-up to one of the best shows. It floundered in the second half for me.
Yeah, I agree.
Then Whisper Me a Love Song, which we were finding about scores and stuff. And so I would have put it in Take It or Leave It, but I think we can concede to like average and be fine with that.
Yeah, I'd probably put up here, so we can meet in the middle.
Then Do Over Damsel, I would say this was one of the best shows of the season for me.
Could be fair.
365 Days to the Wedding was fairly average. I feel like there were a lot of instances that were overshadowed by just how introverted they were.
They were a pretty cute couple, though.
Yeah.
So, fun romance if you got time.
Goodbye Dragon Life is a Take It or Leave It for me. After having finished it, I was kind of just like, oh, well, okay then, that's all it's going to do.
Yeah, I feel like it could have done a little bit more with its premise.
And the demons for like the whole second half was also really weighing down the runtime. The most notorious talker runs the world's greatest clan, I think, was high average.
There. Fun, edgy.
The healer who was banished from his party is in fact the strongest. This was a Take It or Leave It. That one was definitely where it was like, it didn't even feel like it was going to go somewhere. It was just kind of a show.
Yeah, I wish we got a little bit more explanation on what was going on in that show.
Well, explanation about the story beats of what was going on, not explanation about all of the mechanics of being an adventurer. 2.5 Dimensional Seduction would be average.
I'd almost put it runner-up just because it was surprisingly good.
Yeah, for what it was marketing, it ended up being more enjoyable than I was expecting. Yakuza Fiance would be runner-up. I'm glad that the adaptation was just as good as my experience reading the manga, so that was nice.
I'd probably put it a little bit closer to average, but...
Too edgy for you?
No.
For Nina the Starry Bride, I'm stuck between runner-up and average because I'm gonna pull that like manga was better comment.
I'd put it in runners up if it didn't end the way it did.
Yeah, the episode that they decided to end us on within that story arc was just rude, especially since we don't have a season 2 announcement.
So I think we know where Bleach is going.
I got a lot of hate for my thoughts about this Bleach season, but I'm sorry it was not as good as No, not take it or leave it. Oh my god, you still need to watch it to know what's going on. It's average. It could have been better. It could have been paced better. Not to say that it's not still beautiful and it's not still serving a purpose, and I'm still very grateful that they're making the rest of the manga into an adaptation. Blue Lock season 2, I was not as upset as everybody else, but I think it's still average than it is runner-up.
I'd say it's better than a lot of these shows that we have in our average, but...
High average.
High average? Okay, I can go over here next to Notorious Talker.
Then we have Ron Kamonohashi's Forbidden Deductions season 2. Average.
But Ron.
Oh. Demon Lord 2099, I was actually very pleasantly surprised by this show. I almost want to put it in best because I was there for it. It was so great. What?
That wasn't that great.
Okay, fine.
We have other shows coming up.
What do you mean? There's only one that I can see. Okay, fine. Then we have Spirit Chronicles season 2, which I would put in take it or leave it. We waited for so long just for that crap of a second season.
Negative today. Jeez.
And then we have As a Reincarnated Aristocrat, I'll use my appraisal skill to rise in the world season 2. I thought it was almost just as good as season 1. It was still totally worth watching, so it's a runner-up. Then we have Fairy Tail 100-Year Quest. It's just being Fairy Tail, not really bringing too much new to the situation, so it's fairly average. Then we have MF Ghost season 2, which is obviously best of the season. Because cars. So if I was going to move something, I'd move Demon Lord 2099. But also, like, I think that the difference between the best of the seasons and the runners-up was very minimal. Like, all 6 of those shows were really good and totally worth watching.
Yeah. So if we were going to go for a top 10, which of the average would you pick?
So we have 6 right now, so then I'd move Blue Lock in.
Blue Lock, okay.
I would move Notorious Talker in.
Okay.
This is the hard part.
The last 2.
I would probably move Nina in. And then surprisingly, I might move 2.5D Seduction in.
Yeah. Okay.
So there's top 10 if you truly care.
For my top 10, I'd probably swap Whisper Me a Love Song and Ron with Nina and probably Most Notorious Talker, but maybe 2.5D Seduction. I'm not entirely sure which one of those would get cut.
You have to rewatch to find out.
Any other concluding comments about the season?
I feel like I was more pleasantly surprised by a higher number of shows this season than normal. Like, the expectations coming from trailers originally, way back when we watched them in like October, September, were much lower than what it ended up being for like at least 4 shows. So I'm glad that a lot of these shows exceeded expectations because it originally felt like it was going to be a fairly slow season. So there you have it, our final tier list for the shows that we watched for fall 2024. And let us know in the comments what you thought and which shows were your favorite of the season or which shows that you absolutely do not agree with where we placed them. And if you're having fun, please like and subscribe.